What's up, everybody? This is Mitch Wettle, level 3 whiskey sommelier, executive bourbon steward, and founder of Whiskey-Wise. Today I'm going to be teaching you about infusing cigars. Cigars and whiskey go together like cigars and whiskey, really. I mean, they're just peas in a pod. So I brought out 6 different whiskeys today, as well as a secret stash of cigars, which I will totally explain because they're not a secret. And I'm going to be infusing them over the next couple weeks so that I can get some of the actual whiskey flavor into the cigars. First off, I'll talk about the cigars. So I live here in Louisville, Kentucky, and we have this cigar shop called J. Shepherd's. And J. Shepherd actually blends his own cigars, and he goes down to Nicaragua, I believe, to I don't know what cigar factory. That might be on purpose that he didn't tell me, or it could be I really suck at remembering things. And he has a custom blend, and he actually infuses cigars himself. He does a lot of cigars for a lot of the local distilleries around here, Jeff the Creed being one, Copper and Kings. So I'm not going to try and step on his toes too much, but I am still going to infuse cigars. So I'm going to be using mostly Scotch to infuse cigars because there aren't any local Scotch distilleries in Kentucky. So I chose 6. There's a really specific reason for 6. I have 6 containers that I can use. So you don't want to choose 7. Other than that, the way you choose your whiskeys for infusing is you smoke a cigar and drink them at the same time. If it does nice things to the cigar and the whiskey, then it's a good pairing. If it doesn't, it's not. One I was really bummed to find out was a bad pairing was Monkey Shoulder. It has a little bit of a cult following, and I think it's pretty amazing myself. But when I smoked a cigar with it, it just became bland and malty, and it wasn't really that great. So I got 6 of my favorite whiskeys, mostly Scotches, to drink while I'm smoking a cigar, and I am going to infuse them. So this is a pretty sweet cigar. It's a little dark, mild earthiness, nothing too amazing because we are going to be infusing them. You want something that's stout enough to stand up to the whiskey, but you don't want anything that has lots of small little complexities in it that are going to get lost when you just, kind of infuse it with whiskey. So you can do what I did and search someone out who blends their own cigars specifically designed for infusing. Or you can just go to your local tobacconist and be like, hey, I'm looking for a kind of cheap, mild to medium cigar that doesn't really have that much complexity in it. And if they're any good, they'll take you right to it. Now on to the whiskeys. First off, we've got Talisker 57 North. Talisker, it's a great distillery, Scotch, single malt. 57 North is their cask strength version. It's 57% alcohol, 114 proof. It's Talisker 57 degrees north because they're actually at 57 degrees north latitude, longitude, one of the two. The one that's latitude, there we go, the one that goes not along the world. So 57 is obviously an important number to them, so they decided to make their cask strength 57%. It's one of those things, cask strength isn't a regulated term, so they could put it on anything they wanted to and make it any proof, even 80 proof. So this one is Talisker turned up to 11. Talisker is not normally 57% alcohol. When you smoke a cigar with it, it takes some of that punch away, but it leaves a lot of the flavors, so I think it goes really well with the cigar. Next up, I am going into a not Scotch category, forgive me. This is Basil Hayden's Dark Rye. So this is kind of interesting. Dark Rye is actually a style of whiskey out of Canada. And in Canada, what they do is they take rye and they blend it with just a little bit of port. And it obviously makes it a little darker in color because port is this lovely unctuous red, deep, kind of almost blood-like, but I probably shouldn't say that on camera. And then they add rye to it, and it provides this lovely fruity sweetness that counterbalances rye's traditional kind of grassy, spicy notes. When you pair this with a cigar. Normally it takes down the spice and leaves a lot of that grassy fruitiness, and I happen to really like that. Alright, so next up is GlenDronach Cask Strength. This is edition 3. Why edition 3? It's the one I have. GlenDronach is a sherry bomb. It's incredibly sweet, incredibly fruity, and this is a cask strength, so it's that turned up to 11 again. When you smoke a cigar with it, it actually manages to tone down some of the sweetness. You get a little bit more of that fruitiness, a little bit more of that jamminess, and it complements the earthiness of this in particular cigar really well. I've actually already infused cigars with this before, and it was my favorite of all the ones I've done. So I'm definitely going to be doing it again, and probably again and again and again. This in particular bottle is 54.9% alcohol, or just shy of 110 proof. Why do high proof whiskeys tend to work so well with cigars? Well, you've got two really strong flavors competing with each other. And if one of them is just a very mild, soft cigar, or a very mild, smooth, if you want to use that term, whiskey, it can really easily get overpowered. So you want to pick whiskeys and cigars that have dominant notes or just big notes. Next up, we have everybody's favorite Isla, unless you're correct and you say it's Ardbeg, but Lagavulin 16. This is pretty much the gold standard for peated whiskeys. It is medicinal, it is smoky, it is campfire, it is all this amazing stuff, and it's less than $100 for a 16-year-old single malt Scotch. It's hard to beat, unless you have a different preference. I personally prefer Ardbeg, but let's see what Lagavulin does with a cigar. I have used Laphroaig quarter cask before, and it turns out really interesting. It actually managed to tone down some of the smoke and medicinal iodine notes, and it brought out this fruitiness, this woodiness. The peat was still there, but it was a complementary flavor rather than, you know, kind of being in your face. Speaking of Laphroaig, I have Laphroaig Triple Wood here. I ran out of quarter cask, and I haven't bought it again because I didn't like it as much as I like the Triple Wood. Laphroaig quarter cask, it's a great whiskey. What they do is they take their regular Laphroaig, and once they're done aging it in their regular sized casks, they put them into quarter sized casks. So literally casks that are 25% as big as a regular cask. And what that does is it adds this lovely woody note to it. It kind of, you know, pumps it up, gives it a little more flavor complexity to go around with. Triple Wood takes not only their regular Scotch out of their large casks and their quarter casks, but they add sherry casks to that as well, and then they blend it together. So it's this lovely blend of wood, peat, and that sherry sweetness. If you haven't noticed, I'm a big fan of sherry sweetness, just fruity sweetness in general. So this is probably my favorite Laphroaig, and I'm excited to see what happens when I infuse a cigar with it. Last but not least, we do have a bourbon. I'm sorry, Jay, but I smoked a cigar with this and it was really freaking good, so I'm gonna infuse it. My girlfriend actually loves this, smoking a cigar with it. She says it tastes like strawberries and cream when you smoke a cigar with it. So I'm really excited to see what happens when you pair this with a really robust cigar and infuse them. It could turn out to be this unctuous strawberry field, or it could turn out to be a terrible infused cigar. But you never know until you do it. So those were the main components to infusing cigars. There are two other components you're going to need. Component 3, shot glass. Doesn't matter, I have shot glasses from lots of different places. This one came in a Jägermeister gift pack. This one's from a festival I went to that celebrated Geta, which is an amazing breakfast sausage I highly recommend. Others I think I bought for like $1 at Big Lots. Here's one from a local distillery, Jeff the Creed, highly recommend them. Here's one from Jim Beam, I also highly recommend them. They're a pretty good distillery if you haven't heard of them before. Last thing you're going to need is some sort of airtight container. I use these OXOs. They're really handy. They're really handy. They have these pretty easy to use lids. You put it in there, you press the top button, and then suddenly it's airtight. I bought a mixed pack of them at Costco for like 70 bucks. It's a lot of money until you realize they're not just good for cigars. So I'll have to grab those and show you basically what I do. Alright, so I've got my container right here. I'm basically ready to go. This may sound kind of dumb, but the first thing you need to do is make sure your cigar actually fits in it. Wow, very complex. I'm going to be infusing 5 cigars with each different flavor. Why? Well, I have about 50, and I don't want to infuse them all, because this could turn out amazing, this could turn out terrible. The only one I know turns out well is GlenDronach. Everything else is an experiment. And I don't want to waste a bunch of cigars on a failed experiment. So it is pretty stupidly easy. But don't tell anyone I said that. You want to take yourself a shot of whiskey. Don't fill it too high, because you might need to move it. Starting with the Lagavulin 16. And then you just put your cigars in around the whiskey. Very complex. If you need to rewind the video and see it again, I understand. After you do that, you seal it, put it somewhere kind of dark, kind of cool, and forget about it for a couple weeks. The exact amount of time is really up to personal interpretation. The longer you infuse, the more flavor it's going to grab from the whiskey. That being said, that's not always a good thing. Sometimes you want a subtle whiskey note, sometimes you want a big whiskey note. You just have to kind of go and smoke as you age. I found 2 weeks to a month is normally my sweet spot, but if you're impatient, you're impatient. Now, a lot of people might be sitting here screaming like, oh my god, the humidity. How are you going to control the humidity? You're not. So this lovely thing's going to happen. It's going to get super dry in there, and the alcohol is going to evaporate. And then the tobacco is going to absorb that alcohol, and it's going to go up to really high humidity, possibly even 100%. And you're not supposed to store your cigars in 100% humidity. That being said, humidity normally isn't almost half alcohol. So, to each their own. In 2 weeks to a month, mine haven't turned out that bad. If you're super concerned about it, what I do is I recommend buying these Zycar Boveda packs. Now these are really cool because they're two-way humidity control, which basically means if there's not enough humidity, they will release water and it'll humidify your humidor. But if there's too much, it'll absorb the humidity. So what you need to do is you need to find yourself a good dry, oh that sounds terrible. There we go. Dry Zycar. And when you're done, you just want to immediately throw this in there to absorb that extra humidity. And shouldn't destroy your cigars at all. You can rehydrate or cigars with pretty decent success so long as they haven't been too dry for too long. Same goes for overhydration. You can pull the extra out of there so long as it hasn't been too long, which is another reason I say 2 weeks to a month. You leave it in there for a year, you might be surprised what's growing on them by the time you're done. Next up will probably be a really fast shot of me doing this because it is boring and tedious. Alright, I know that was super complex and super exciting, but that's basically how you infuse cigars. Next is the hard part. You have to wait. But after the waiting comes the best part, when you smoke them and drink whiskey. So, normally I cheers you out, but I don't have any drinking glasses. So, cheers.